In this fictional, dramatized story set inside a high-profile talk show environment, the atmosphere behind the studio lights was far more intense than what the audience ever saw on screen. The studio was perfectly prepared, cameras aligned, audience seated, and every smile rehearsed. But what no one knew was that today's episode would turn into something nobody expected. Meghan Markle sat quietly in her dressing room. She was calm on the outside, but her mind was busy. The bright studio lights, the scheduled questions, the media attention, everything felt heavier than usual. She adjusted her outfit and looked at herself in the mirror. At 43 years old, she had learned how to control her expressions in public, how to remain composed even when surrounded by pressure. But something about today felt different. Down the hallway, Kelly Clarkson, 42 years old, was reviewing the show notes. She had built her reputation on being warm, honest, and open with her guests. Her team respected her for not letting interviews become scripted or artificial. She believed in real conversations, even if they sometimes became uncomfortable. But even she didn't know that today would push boundaries further than ever before. The audience was already excited. Meghan Markle's appearance on the show had been heavily promoted. Social media had been buzzing for days. Everyone expected emotional moments, personal revelations, maybe even light controversy, but not what was about to unfold. When Meghan walked onto the stage, the applause was strong. She smiled politely, waving to the audience, and sat down opposite Kelly. The energy between them was polite but tense, like two intelligent people carefully measuring each other's words. The conversation started smoothly. They spoke about life changes, public attention, and the challenges of being in the spotlight. Meghan responded carefully, choosing her words with precision. Kelly nodded, listening closely, occasionally smiling to keep the tone light. But then the direction shifted. Kelly leaned forward slightly and asked a question that was not on the original script. It was about media narratives and how public perception shapes personal identity. It was not aggressive, but it was sharp enough to change the tone in the room. Meghan paused. The smile faded slightly. She answered calmly at first, explaining her perspective, her experiences with public scrutiny, and how narratives often feel out of control once they spread. But as the conversation continued, the tone became more layered, more emotional. The audience could feel the shift, even if they couldn't fully understand it. Kelly tried to steer it gently, but Meghan's responses grew more direct. She spoke about boundaries, about misunderstanding, and about how certain moments in her life had been misrepresented. Her voice remained controlled, but there was intensity behind her words. At one point, Kelly attempted to lighten the mood with a remark, but it landed awkwardly. The audience laughed uncertainly, unsure if it was appropriate. Meghan did not smile. Instead, she responded with a firm tone that surprised even the crew behind the cameras. The studio atmosphere changed instantly. The producers in the control room began exchanging looks. The director signaled for the conversation to be redirected, but it was already moving beyond their control. This was no longer a casual celebrity interview. It had turned into something raw and unpredictable. Kelly, sensing the tension, tried to regain balance. She thanked Meghan for sharing her thoughts and attempted to transition to a lighter segment. But Meghan wasn't done speaking. She continued, expressing frustration about how public conversations often simplify complex realities. The exchange became more intense, not loud or chaotic, but emotionally charged in a way that made the audience sit in silence. No one knew whether to clap or stay quiet. Backstage, assistants moved quickly. Producers whispered urgently. Someone suggested cutting to a commercial break, but the timing felt too sensitive. Every second on live television mattered. Then came the moment that would later be described differently, depending on who told the story. Kelly, maintaining professionalism, gently but firmly attempted to close the topic and move forward. Meghan, feeling that her perspective wasn't being fully understood in that moment, responded with a final statement that carried strong emotion. The tone wasn't disrespectful, but it was firm enough to create a visible tension in the room. For a brief moment, silence filled the studio. The audience didn't know how to react. The energy was frozen. Even Kelly paused, processing the weight of the exchange. The director finally signaled a break. Cameras cut away, but what happened behind the scenes was even more complicated. Backstage, both teams tried to de-escalate the situation. Kelly spoke with her producers, ensuring the show would continue professionally. Meghan's team discussed the segment privately, making sure everything was handled with care. There was no shouting, no chaos, just tension, misunderstanding, and emotional exhaustion from both sides. However, as television often works, perception outside the studio became louder than reality inside it. Within minutes, social media began reacting. Clips, some incomplete, some misleading, started circulating. Headlines began forming before the full context was even understood. People speculated, exaggerated, and interpreted the moment in dramatically different ways. By the time the show resumed filming other segments, the narrative outside had already grown beyond control. Later in this fictional storyline interpretation, reports suggested that Meghan's segment was removed from certain re-air edits due to its intense nature, though the original broadcast remained unchanged in its live form. This fueled even more online debate, even though the reality was far more nuanced. It was simply standard editing decisions and timing constraints, not a dramatic expulsion. Kelly continued her show professionally after the break, greeting the next guest with her usual warmth. Meghan left the studio shortly afterward with her team, maintaining composure despite the emotionally charged experience. There was no public conflict afterward, no continuation of confrontation, only the lingering echo of a conversation that had become more intense than anyone intended. In the days that followed, analysts, fans, and commentators debated what had happened. Some said it was a rare moment of honesty on television. Others called it uncomfortable. But those who understand live media knew one thing clearly. When emotion meets live broadcasting, even the smallest shift in tone can feel enormous. Meghan later reflected in this fictional narrative as someone who felt she spoke honestly in a controlled environment that suddenly became overwhelming. Kelly, on the other hand, remained professional, continuing her work as she always had, balancing openness with structure. And in the end, what remained wasn't a scandal, but a reminder. Television moments are not always what they appear to be. Sometimes they are just human conversations under bright lights, magnified by millions of eyes watching for drama where there is only emotion.